No, I'm going to kill some applications on my computer, maybe.
Don't touch the rabbit ears on top of your computer. This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Are you searching for a new job? That can be stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and the job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. And sometimes you go all the way through the interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary, offer, or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you, and on Hired you receive personal interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about what opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Hired offers access to more than 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. And we help you find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let them know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance. And if you go check them out at the show's link, that's hire.com/JavaScript Jabber, you can get double the hiring bonus that they offer. That's $600 instead of $300. So go check them out at hire.com/JavaScript Jabber today. Hey everybody, and welcome to another JavaScript Jabber show. This week on our panel we have Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
Aimee Knight.
Hello from Nashville.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. Quick shout out, Angular Dev Summit is now over, but you can still get the videos if you want. Just go get an all access pass. We have two special guests this week. We have Eric Simmons.
Hey, how's it going?
And Albert Pye.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Now, do you guys want to introduce yourselves really quickly?
Sure. Yeah. So Albert and I have been best friends since childhood, actually. We grew up in Chicago. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area now. And our primary job is running Thingster.io, which some of you might be familiar with. We teach the bleeding edge of JavaScript technologies, various frameworks, as well as even the backend portions. And we actually just created a new project called Stacklets, which we're going to be talking about today. But we're the co-founders of Thingster and the two-man team behind Thingster.io.
Awesome.
Very cool. So the thing we have you on the docket for is Stackblitz, which looks pretty cool. Do you want to give people kind of the 2-minute elevator pitch for what that is?
Yeah, totally. Well, Stackblitz is, in short, it's an online VS Code IDE for Angular, React, and today we just rolled out support for Svelte. Preact is coming tomorrow, and Vue. Essentially, you come to the site, and we figured out how to essentially run like Webpack and VS Code all inside of your browser. So you can just type and we hot reload your application just like it works locally, and it's insanely fast. And we ended up creating Stackblitz because of our work at Thingster, where we teach people how to use the bleeding edge technologies like Vue or React or Angular, whatever have you. But we found that a very common problem was getting build tools set up. And even if you're trying to create a prototype or something with any of these frameworks, it's often very cumbersome to have to download some CLI and get that set up and get up and running. With Stackblitz, it's literally one click to get a real environment set up where you can be building out your application, and you can send that link to anyone and they can see that application and play around with it as well.
It's funny what you're talking about. Kind of brings two things to mind. First of all, back when Heroku was brand new, this is kind of what Heroku was for Ruby. And
yes.
And then also we had Tim Caswell on as a panelist for a long time, and he was one of the guys that helped build Cloud9, which is also an online IDE.
Yeah, totally. And we've definitely, as we've been building it out, we've Cloud9 and Heroku specifically have been two things that we've looked at for a source of comparison and inspiration, because they are very similar to what we're doing. The difference with Stacklets specifically is with Cloud9, they have an online editor, and then you're like renting basically a VM somewhere out in their cloud, right? Mm-hmm. And same with Heroku, you're getting a server instance out there in the cloud. And so there's typically a cost associated with that. We actually figured out how to run all of that within your browser. So when you're actually building and running the application, your browser's compiling it, serving it, bundling it, like literally everything. And so like Stackblitz actually works offline. So if you disconnect the internet from your computer, it's just a web application. You don't have to install anything. We use the like progressive web app APIs to actually run a live dev server inside of your browser, so you can keep developing offline. So we are using virtually any server resources to make that work in your browser.
So let's just kind of let's talk through some of this, because I mean my brain's going directly to how in the heck do you run Webpack in the browser?
The answer is that you don't actually, because we spent a lot of time. It started off as an R&D project for us, because we had this realization as we are teaching our students on Thinkster. All of these tools, these build tools, are written in JavaScript, right? So why can't they just run inside of a browser? And there's you may have heard of System.js, which is kind of the equivalent of Webpack but in the browser. And it's a shame it's gotten a bad rep for being slow. But we ended up actually realizing after investigating is that the actual reason it's slow is because for System.js to request files, like how Webpack has to load in files and compile them, System.js actually has to make XHR requests to grab every single file, which can take a very long time. As I'm sure y'all are familiar with, doing hundreds of XHRs in sequence can take a while. So what we ended up figuring out, testing how to do, was creating an in-browser file system that system could immediately read from, and then basically adding like an actual FS wrapper and a very powerful loader system around system itself. And so we actually have Webpack loaders running, but it's not even running on Webpack. It's actually running on system itself.
I'm still not sure I follow.
I think my brain just exploded.
What Joe said, I'm like, okay, how? Yeah.
It sounds probably very magical. The reality is it's just a lot of elbow grease to make it happen. But essentially, the real trick with making system more versatile was giving it the notion of a file system. Because the problem with web browsers, if we want to try and create a development environment that will run natively inside of it, is that there's no notion of a file system. We can't.
Yes, that is definitely the one problem with web browsers. Continue.
Absolutely. And so what we ended up doing, especially when you're talking about creating an online IDE, and so we created a file system that would work in browser. But another restraint is that obviously browsers are they don't have as much compute power as running something locally. So we couldn't necessarily load in, all of your NPM packages and whatever have you.
Webpack for that matter.
or Webpack. And so we essentially, the entire system had to be built, when I say system, not System.js, but our entire build tool chain that we created had to be created from scratch to run really fast inside of a browser. And giving us those parts of local development that are critical for running complex loader systems inside of a browser.
That sounds awesome. I mean, where did you come up with this idea and decide, hey, we're going to do this?
Yeah, it started because we were having a trouble teaching our students at Thinkster how to use these latest frameworks, because more often than not they would get stuck not on the frameworks themselves or the concepts we were trying to teach them. They would get stuck trying to install something on their computer. They're trying to install Webpack or any of these other tools. I'm sure people listening have definitely ran into this issue where they want to get started with something and it's a huge hurdle.
Yeah, you have to tell them to blow out their node models and run npm install again and figure out why that failed. And
it takes forever. It's an awful experience. Getting started with something new locally.
Right.
And so we were thinking, okay, well, what kind of solutions are we looking at here? And there's a lot of online playgrounds that will give you stripped down versions of being able to play around with these frameworks and what have you. Typically you're including a script tag where it's this package is being exposed as a global. And while that works, it's not ideal because there's a large context switch when you do inevitably have to use that framework locally. And you're not getting the real experience there. You're not actually installing NPM dependencies. You're not importing, from NPM. It's a very different experience. And so with Stackblitz, we wanted to really port that same exact experience and make it work inside of a browser. And we were able to do it. If we couldn't have figured it out, we wouldn't have actually gone and made Stackblitz. But because of like the progressive web app APIs, where we could essentially create a dev server that runs in the browser, and obviously all these compilers are written in JavaScript, and System.js itself, is a huge part of what made this possible. We're at a very unique point in time where if this was a year ago, we wouldn't have been able to do this inside of a browser.
Now, you mentioned that you're kind of creating a Visual Studio Code experience, and Visual Studio Code is written in Electron. Is there some limitation with Electron that wouldn't allow you to essentially simulate the file system instead of making them do the install on the back end?
Can you rephrase your question?
So I guess what I'm asking is that Electron is essentially a Chromium browser. And so, why not just create this as a, kind of a standalone Electron app, kind of like Visual Studio Code is, except you substitute your browser side file system instead of using the actual file system like VS Code does.
Yeah, so with like Electron and with VS Code for that matter, they actually get native access to the file system, and we thought that potentially like trying to fight the compatibility with that would potentially be like a losing strategy, since you basically have to polyfill FS versus like most of these transpilers that need to run don't actually need the notion of a file system. Like a lot of them, you can just pass them like a straight string and they can compile it. So instead of like trying to like get these interfaces to line up so that we can just get the thing running, we decided to create the system from scratch so that we have just like the minimal amount of code needed in order to compile your app.
And this ties into like one of the big features of Stackblitz, which is the primary feature, which is speed. Because when we were building it, a big part of it was, it's absolutely possible to have, Webpack running on a server or something, bundling your app, and other stuff like that. The problem is the question of like speed and scalability, because it costs money to run those servers to bundle Webpack and whatever have you. And importantly, for the UX, it's going to be slower. And so in order to make it work fast in a browser, we had this goal of, it needs to be 3 to 5x faster than local development for people to come here and go, wow, I didn't know a browser can do that. And if that's the case, then, maybe there is something to running dev tool chains within a browser context. And so that's been a guiding light for us as we've built out a lot of the Stackblitz's core technologies.
So one question I have that I don't think we've talked about, this also works offline.
It does.
Can you talk about how you went about that?
Okay, yeah, totally. I think the key one is the service worker API, which essentially allows you to run a proxy server in browser. And the original use case for service workers was for intelligently caching assets for your application and that sort of thing. But it's, we realized, it's a proxy server. We could actually just, program this thing to spit back proper assets that are actually virtual. They're not like real assets anywhere. They're coming from in-memory because of from that in-memory file system we were talking about.
Well, yeah, so I have a question there. I mean, so if it's in memory, are you guys ever reaching a point where this like falls down?
Yeah, that was one of the things that we tested to make sure that it would be able to handle the largest applications. And so the first test we did once we had the core infrastructure built out was testing out Real World, which is actually a project that we created. The headline's the mother of all demo apps. It's a massive real world application, basically a clone of medium.com, and it's written in a whole bunch of different frameworks, Angular, there's Vue support, there's a React one, and it can run all of them in your browser. And it's a very large application, making requests to a backend. And we were surprised, but it makes sense. Like, when you are storing these in memory, the largest applications we've seen only take maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 megabytes, which any browser out there can handle just fine.
That's really surprising.
Yeah, we were surprised too. The entire way as we were de-risking the hurdles, we figured we might get stuck somewhere. But browsers have really gotten to a point where they're powerful enough where you can actually build the web using the web. And so that's kind of where we want to go with Stackblitz, not just Stackblitz itself, but like we want to actually open source the core technologies, because, wouldn't it be great to live in a future where when you write a loader for a tool chain, that it can work natively inside of a web browser, so that if you want to allow other people to try out a new framework or a new library or whatever, you can just send them a link and they can try it out. And that's the power of JavaScript. We see that all the time with a lot of the innovation coming from the community, the ability to share our knowledge. And we think it would be a huge benefit to the JavaScript community if we could figure out how to create a very robust, universal tool chain that works in a browser, as well as locally as well.
A bunch of people are going to try to break this now, right?
we encourage them to.
Me included.
We encourage them to, throw whatever you got at it. There are, obviously limitations on certain things, certain stuff we can't do. Some people like throw binaries in it and then they're like, this thing's breaking. And we're like, we actually have static asset support coming within the next week or two here. So that'll solve the binary issue. But it can handle some very surprisingly large applications. And then that was a hard requirement for us when we started working on Stackblitz.
So another question. So if you guys are leveraging like the VS Code, does Stacklets like automatically update when VS Code pushes an update?
We have to do it manually, but we actually have to run a variant of VS Code. So we use like their Monaco core editing engine, but we also have some of the other stuff like project search. We have go to definition working in there. We have like the file sidebar, like stuff that we had to put in ourselves. And part of the problem is that, and this kind of comes back to an earlier question about running an Electron and what have you. A lot of VS Code's functionality is surprisingly coupled to running on a machine. So, for example, the way that you do color themes with the the syntax highlighting, that's actually done with TextMate grammars that runs on like C, and that doesn't work in a browser. And so we had to figure out ways of doing that. Like that's just one example, but there's a lot of things where there's a lot of assumptions that this is going to be running on on straight up on metal. So we had to bite the bullet. This kind of goes across the board for a lot of the things we had to implement, but you bite the bullet and say, okay, we're going to have to redo this, but built for the web first. And it takes more time to do it that way. But again, the benefit of being able to just send a link to someone and they can be editing a fully fledged Angular, React, Vue, et cetera application, I think that's worth it at the end of the day, the ability to do that.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'm wondering with this too is that you're saying, hey, look, this gives us the opportunity to get going quickly without having to go through all the setup headaches. And I can see getting to a win fast, right? Getting people in and seeing, hey, I can write this code and it does the thing that I expect it to and it all builds and it's all happy. But don't people eventually have to be able to set things up on their machine? How far into the curriculum do you get before you say, okay, now go download VS Code and install NPM and have your headache?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, right now this is, it's really good for taste. It's like the Costco samples of frameworks, right? You walk up, you take it, you test it out, you're like, that tastes good. I want some more of that, right? And we actually have the ability, so for like Angular and React applications, we have an export button that will export that application into Angular CLI and create React app respectively. And so you just npm install and then you're good to go. So we automatically will export your projects to run in a local format. And when you make that jump, what's interesting that we've seen with our learners is that they already understand the core concepts of the framework because they learned that in Stackblitz. And so when things don't work locally, they don't assume the problem is Angular, React, or whatever. They know that the problem is with the build tools. And that's a very interesting point, because what that means is what's been going on, what's hard about learning a new framework often is that you don't know what's wrong. Is it the framework? Is it something wrong with your setup specifically? As a newcomer to a new framework, it's hard to discern because you don't have that experience. But having started in Stackblitz first, you know what is supposed to work on the framework side of things.
That makes sense. Do you have deployment tools for Stackblitz? So let's say that I decide not to install VS Code and I want to put it up on Heroku, or I set up a server with Node or something running on it. Do you have something like that where I just push a button and it goes off into a container?
Not quite yet. A lot of people right now they just export the project and then they deploy it from their command line or whatever, because it's ready to rock and roll. The second you hit export, you can deploy to Firebase or whatever have you. We're actually going to be adding import and export from GitHub very soon here, so you can, if you have any CI stuff set up around that GitHub repo, it'll automatically do that for you. And we'd love to add easy ways for people to deploy to Heroku or whatever have you in the future. But a lot of people even now, like they're spinning these things up as small projects and to share with friends. And we actually do host the application on our site. So you can send the link to the running application to anyone at any given time, and they can literally see that and play around with it. And we're actually shipping an update within the next couple of weeks, where as I'm typing and I'm editing the application, anyone watching that app URL will be able to see it hot reload live, like on their device, which is super cool.
That is super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really excited about that one because it's going to be, being able to hot reload across airwaves, devices, and continents is going to be for design teams, for any product team, that's going to be really valuable to get immediate feedback on that sort of thing.
I see an issue in GitHub right now to add an integrated terminal from like 4 days ago. Have you guys put any thought into that? Because it seems like that would not be the easiest feature to add.
Yeah, we've kicked around the idea of that, and so we often ask. I think that's like the third or fourth time we've gotten that issue actually from various people. It's definitely a very common feature request, and whenever we ask why, the answer is typically, I need to use the Angular CLI to generate components, or I need to use, like they have specific things in mind they want to use. Mm-hmm. Rarely ever do we hear, I need to be able to, do file system, crazy file system operations. It's typically being able to run the CLI commands.
Or like being able to run tests.
Yeah, right. Being able to run tests. And so what we're actually doing is we're building the functionality that they're seeking into the user interface itself. So for example, for the Angular CLI, we actually have an update coming out next week where instead of having to run, ng generate new component, when you click on add new file, you can just click on component, which is like part of a dropdown. You type in the name and it automatically scaffolds everything and imports that component into the nearest ng module, just like the CLI does. And there's been a couple of other issues that kind of were with similar features as well. And people seem to really like the UI versions of this more, actually, than the CLI, because we can give them more context around the actions happening than a CLI typically can give you.
All right. That makes sense.
So, yeah, and this reminds me a little bit, too. I know that there are some JavaScript terminal emulators that you can put on a web page. And so what I'm wondering is, because you mentioned that this is a VS Code-like experience, are you pulling in the code editor pieces from VS Code? I can't remember what the name of that engine's called. But is that what you've
Monaco.
done? Yeah, Monaco. Or have you pulled that in, or have you written your own?
We've pulled in because the VS Code uses Monaco itself, and Monaco they ship as a separate module. We do use Monaco. We also use other parts of the VS Code code base.
Okay.
And to make a lot of the functionality work. But again, we have to be very careful about what we pull in, and we usually have to rewrite parts of it in order to make it very performant in the browser, and to play nice with the paradigms of a web browser. Like one thing specifically that is different is that, for example, that file system, we can't do synchronous file reading by default. because the way that we have like to ensure that we keep the memory usage low, we only for like NPM modules, we only hold on to the files that your application is actually importing. And if you, let's say you import something like a SAS file, which isn't going to be included off of the main field for like the JavaScript files. If you import a SAS file, our file system retrieves that on demand and traces down all the imports in that SAS file. And that's very different than local, because typically on local, when you do an install from NPM, it downloads the entire tarball. And that's a lot of space and memory that would take to hold that in browser. And so we have to be very careful and load stuff on demand, file by file, when you're using it, which leads to a faster experience, but it breaks a lot of the common paradigms that like VS Code and Webpack, et cetera, are built around.
What about language services? Because I know Visual Studio has language services and essentially, for example, TypeScript or basically anything that's not JavaScript. They have a separate service that's running, so it's another process that it talks to parse the code and do the syntax highlighting. How do you get around that?
Yeah, so Monaco actually has part of VS Code's language service built in. And what's nice about it is that it separates all of the compilers that it's using to parse all the languages. They're forced to be in web workers by default. So all of your heavy parsing of files to get the syntax highlighting, that's happening in a web worker. So it's not blocking any UI or any painting from the browser.
Cool.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that like all of the heavy lifting for our architecture actually happens inside of a web worker as well. So when, all the bundling, compiling, et cetera, happens in a web worker. And then once we have that post-compiled bundle ready, we ship it over the wire and over into the preview windows and then instantiate it. So the only work that when you're actually previewing the application, the only work it's doing is actually just instantiating code that's already been compiled, which makes for a really buttery smooth experience, like a scary buttery smooth experience, because you wouldn't expect it from a browser. But that's because it's all the hard work's happening in a web worker.
This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/JavaScript Jabber. So I guess the other thing that I'm wondering here is, how do you architect something like this? Because it sounds like there are a lot of moving pieces and a lot to keep track of.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Very carefully.
very, very carefully. We're in the process of open sourcing a lot of the pieces of Stackblitz, and it's going to take us probably months to do this, because we're still experimenting with different ways to handle various parts of these that there are a couple of things specifically that are going to provide even more speed benefits than we're seeing today. For example, we figured out a way that we can potentially be leveraging IndexedDB to increase the speed of the boot times and the bundling times by somewhere between 2 to 3x. And for like NPM installs, we figured out a way that we've tested locally that will install about 5x faster on average, which would actually make it I don't know what else is out there, but I would definitely think that this would probably be the fastest NPM client in the world, because we're stripping down the packages to just the bare that your application needs. So we're still working on adding a couple of upgrades into this architecture before we start really doing a clean job of modularizing it and open sourcing the various pieces. But so that's a lot of people have been asking when we're going to open source, and the answer is once we have a lot of the final architectural decisions hammered out and proven and implemented, we're gonna go and start releasing that stuff.
Yeah, and another part of the architecture is that we try to make as much of the lifecycle of the application client-side heavy as possible. Otherwise, like if like comparing back to Cloud9, like since they have to run a server farm in like a cluster of compilers in the cloud, that makes it a lot harder to scale and a lot more expensive to scale up as we get more users. But since the way we architected our app is basically, by making it client-side heavy, and then basically all our backend is responsible for is just persistence of your app, so it doesn't do anything like really CPU intensive.
So one thing I wanted to ask, you mentioned this quite a while ago. You said we couldn't have done this with browsers a year ago. Could you expound on that and maybe give us some clarity as to why this couldn't have been done a year ago?
Yeah, there's just been a lot of innovation in browsers over the past year. The adoption of a lot of the APIs that progressive web apps consist of allowed this to be possible. V8 just keeps getting faster and faster and better and better. System.js has matured a lot. Guy Bedford has done an absolutely incredible job on System, and it's just the crown jewel that no one seems to have picked up and really identified as recently, which is a shame. And so I think that the combination of those things, the unpackage and JS deliver, having CDNs for all of the npm files, that's how we're able to do installs directly on the client itself. So you don't actually hit our servers when you're installing files. You're actually just compiling from CDNs. These are a lot of these things really weren't around even just a year ago, or at least weren't even in a state where they could be used for what we're doing them for.
So that brings up another thing. You talk about System.js and how amazing it is, right? So the Angular team has made a concerted effort. They're moving away from System.js, which is just one of many people that use System.js. But do you have comments about that particular thing?
Yeah, I think System.js. I think for Guy Bedford, he'd have to speak for himself. We talked with him a bit at this point, and his vision for System was to create the plumbing that would be required in order to run IDEs inside of your browser. Like that, that was his motivation in creating System, and so it's always been a very long bet on the future. And again, when the Angular team adopted System, like 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, whenever it was, the web wasn't quite there yet. And even today, for what System's trying to do, the web still isn't quite there yet. And it's probably going to be another year or two before you can use System alone, and it works incredibly well on the browser. It may be sooner. Guys working really hard to make System to get that developer experience around System to be really great. It's kind of like this. Like System is essentially a Formula One car but it's stripped down to the metal. There's nothing. It's this super fast vehicle, but there's no seat and there's no steering wheel. And if you just take the time to, flush out the interior a little bit, it screams. It's faster than Webpack. It's faster than anything else out there. But the problem is actually just in the last mile of making it an absolutely excellent experience to drive.
Interesting. A cool perspective. So one other thing I wanted to ask, which was the finances of this. How is this getting paid for?
Well, the benefit of running everything on the client is that we actually spend more on Chipotle burritos than server costs per month. No joke. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of a side project of Thinkster, and so we're happy to pay for the hosting. But
what about the development costs?
We bill ourselves $0 an hour for this sort of work.
Your time has no value. You're saying.
Don't tell our clients that. But yeah, it's if we're really excited about the idea of being able to contribute some real world knowledge about how potentially a universal loader system that worked natively in browser could look like and could function. And I think even with just the launch of Stackblitz, I think a lot of people have at least started to question, okay, are we at that point now where we can, maybe doing development on a Chromebook might not be so crazy,
Right.
within the next couple of years.
Right. So continuing on in that same thing, I'm going to asking hard questions. Is there a future potentially where this product or some variation on this product costs money? And is a profit, or at least, some kind of an income center for Thinkster?
Yeah, I think if we start charging for this, we'll probably incorporate this as a separate company. We're spending a lot of time working on Stacklets right now, and so I think we're pretty close to just starting to work full time on it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of features that I think would make sense to pay for. A lot of people have been asking for the ability to have private projects and real-time collaboration, so like Google Docs style and that sort of thing. Which I'm not sure if we necessarily charge for that, but maybe the private projects thing would make sense to charge for. I think there's definitely ways that we could make this a sustainable, which is definitely if we get to the point where we decide like this is something that we really want to sink the next couple of years of our life into. Sustainability is definitely going to be a top ticket item that we have to accomplish. Obviously, otherwise, this has been a fun side project and we'll be broke, which
right.
wouldn't be as fun, wouldn't be super fun, but we've been there before.
So what about like just interesting and cool projects that people have put up? Have you guys got a list of like, hey, wow, look at this that this person has done or this person has done?
Yeah, we're putting together. We've been keeping track. Like a lot of people are posting on Twitter the various things they've created. I mean, the Angular Fire team. They have their demos of it. The Angular Fire 2 library specifically running inside of this, which is super cool to be able to just play around with that and see it change live.
Yeah, that is cool. Did that cost a bunch of extra work on their part to make that happen, or did that just run?
No, it just works because for like the Angular our Angular project, it actually mirrors the Angular CLI pretty much exactly. You can even use the Angular CLI.json config to add in various styles, and soon with the generator support we were talking about, adding prefixes and that sort of thing. So these actually reflect that local environment pretty much exactly. Like there's obviously a lot of little things that people run into that we have to fix, but we work really hard to make it be parity with that local experience. But yeah, the Angular Fire team released their demos, and if you go to the GitHub, they have a link to it. Their stuff is really cool. There's a lot of really cool animations people are making using like React Motion and stuff like that. And this past week, we actually implemented Sass imports, so you could actually import from NPM. So for example, with Angular Material, you can create a Sass file, import the Angular Material Sass themer, and then create Sass themes hot reloaded. So you can just type in a new color and then boom, the entire application changes like without reloading. It's pretty incredible. And so that one's been super cool as well.
So I actually looked at your stuff because I do a lot of Pluralsight content, right? So I do a lot of teaching, which is fairly similar to, in some ways, to Thinkster. And I was looking at this thinking, how could I leverage these for my courses? And some of the stuff that I'm doing, the work they actually do, like, hey, install this NPM stuff is very meaningful, but for lots of stuff it wouldn't be. So I was kind of interested to see that you guys had put this out because I'm always looking for ways to communicate better and let people play around with projects and do demo code a lot easier in courses.
Absolutely. Yeah. Education, the whole reason we started working on it was because of our own use case of education, teaching Thinkster users. And we're small peas to the work you do on Pluralsight. But, it's definitely it's made a large difference in our day to day. I'm sure like for anyone else who's listening as well, it's being able to give them a live environment with zero setup. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty incredible, especially because it feels exactly like their local environment. We've worked really hard to make it feel that way. And we actually have some more features that will help with that are coming out in the next couple of weeks. One specifically is you're going to have the ability to put a GitHub URL. Like, so if you stacklets.com/edit/GitHub, and then just a repo name and the folder. And if it's an Angular CLI project or Create React app or Vue or whatever, it'll actually run that live. So you can just push code to a GitHub repo, and you can have a link that lets people run those examples live on Stackblitz without having to do any other configuration, which a lot of people use, for docs or for courses. They have a GitHub repo to maintain that source code. And so this allows you to just have, for free with no additional setup, a link to a running Stackblitz instance of it.
That's awesome. Any other big cool features that are coming down the pike?
I think we covered all of them. Have I missed any?
Yeah, I think that basically covers it.
Yeah. I think we've talked about just about all of them. They're in the immediate term, at least.
So if people want to go check it out or follow what you guys are working on, maybe follow you on Twitter, GitHub, maybe have a blog, I don't know. What are the best places to find you guys?
Yeah, on Twitter, you can just follow @Stackblitz. Our website, the Stackblitz website, is stackblitz.com. And from there, you can I post on Medium when we do updates and that sort of thing, and we post about that on Twitter. So feel free to just follow us on Twitter and go to our website and whatnot. And we have all the information posted there.
All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Don't wait for users to report problems. Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. You can replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files and having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications. It has full support for JavaScript and all other major languages and platforms. It takes less than 10 minutes to set up, and you can get a free 14-day trial by going to raygun.com and signing up today. Aimee, do you have some picks for us?
Yep, I do. So the first one, it's a promises series that someone put out that's pretty active on Twitter. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce his last name either. It's Andrew Delpret. I have no idea if I said that correctly. But anyways, I actually reviewed the series for him, and he gave me a discount code for JavaScript Jabber, which is Jabber Promise, all one word. But it's you can find it at 5minutedev.com, and I'll put links to that in the show notes. So that is my programming pick. And then my other pick, I have been doing CrossFit lately. So I still run every morning, but I've been doing CrossFit as well. So basically my body is like tortured right now because I run like 40 miles a week and I'm doing CrossFit, but it's super fun. I'm used to just lifting, and now like going to the gym and lifting weights feels super vain, because the point of CrossFit is the point is not to like look good. The point is to like be functional and do all these movements. So I don't know, like I've drunk the CrossFit Kool-Aid for sure. Anyway, so that's my other pick. Like, I'm even going to a competition this weekend, so it'll be fun. Anyways, that's it for me.
You joined the cult, huh?
I did. Like, for the longest time, I was like, I don't understand why people do this. It seems really bad for your body, but I feel like if you have a good coach, and you're doing the movements correctly, like, I'm super sore, but in a really good way. And it's just a ton of fun. There's usually like really good community. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about it.
All right, Joe, what are your picks?
All right, so I have a couple of picks here. First off, I was over looking at some stuff that Sarah Drasner had tweeted recently. So throw out a little name shout out to her. If you don't follow her on Twitter, you probably should. But she recently posted something, that a Twitter account that absolutely, no doubt about it, you should absolutely follow. It's called Wholesome Meme, which is exactly those two words, wholesome and meme. And it's really just a whole bunch of uplifting stuff, but with a fair amount of humor to it. Posted to Twitter, and it's like, I don't know. It's like these crazy, very, very rare shining beacons of light in the dumpster fire that is the internet. And it's awesome. In the cesspool of the internet of hate and negativity, it's actually really awesome. And just their take on it, it's not like the whole standard, oh, cute picture of a puppy, or here's an uplifting story about a person who did something good. There's a fair amount of like, I don't know, edgy comedy to it that's also very, at the same time, very positive. So wholesome meme. And then my second pick is, I have no idea how I did not know about Sarah Cooper. Sarah Cooper, who runs the Cooper Review. She blogs on Medium a lot. She actually just published a book. I have not laughed so hard reading. It's a humor blog that she puts together where she has these different articles with lots of visuals and stuff. And it's very up-to-date tech. She does a lot of comedy about women in tech as well, and like how to be non-confrontational when a woman in tech. And it's just these hilariously like parody comedy bits and blogs. And she has a blog called "How to Stop Procrastinating and Finish What You." And that's the name of the article. And it was so awesome.
That's awesome.
She talks about spending 4 hours reading blogs on how to not procrastinate in there. And it's so funny. I have not laughed so much. So it's called The Cooper Review, and links will be in the show notes. But she's posted Medium. Oh my gosh, I was laughing so hard. So those are my picks. Both of them on the lighter side of things. There you go.
All right. I'm going to jump in with a couple of picks. One of them is I found an open source version of, or a clone of Pivotal Tracker, which is kind of a Scrum Agile tracking tool that I've used in the past, and I really like it. The original one was called Fulcrum, kind of a play on Pivotal. But anyway, there's a company called CodeMiners 42. I think that's what they're called. Anyway, so they've been maintaining their own version of Fulcrum, and so you can go install it. I found the easiest way to install it was to click the button in the README that says deploy to Heroku. That was super easy. So I tried setting it up on a server, and it was kind of a pain. They don't really tell you how to do it. I know how to deploy Rails apps. It's Rails on the back end. I think it's Backbone on the front end, but I just couldn't get it quite to go. So anyway, but yeah, on Heroku it runs great. So I'm pretty happy there. And then I've also been using, I've been revamping the production system again for podcasts. And first of all, I'm trying to hire somebody to help me get show notes done because one of the people that was working for me just vanished. I don't know where she went, but she vanished. So yeah, I'm definitely looking for help there. If you're interested, just email me, chuck@devchat.tv. But in order to kind of rework that and make it a little bit easier to track, I've been using Asana, which is another task tracking app, and Zapier. And so I just create the task for the episode to be produced, and then it adds all the subtasks for me and assigns it to the correct person and all of that great stuff. So really enjoying that, and it's doing a lot for the accountability there. And then I'm just working on tying it into Mattermost, which is my Slack. It's an open source Slack clone, which is nice and free, and you don't have to pay for user or for per user, and you get basically complete. It does pretty much everything that Slack does. Has a whole bunch of integrations and stuff too. So anyway, all that to say, I'm really pretty happy with the way that this setup is kind of coming together. Yeah, Eric, why don't you go next?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, there's two things for my picks. One is we mentioned it earlier, but Real World, which is essentially it's basically to MVC but full stack. It teaches you how to build, it shows you how a real-world medium.com clone is built using a handful of front ends and back ends, and it's constantly growing. People are adding more. Like Rust just got added as a back end last week, and that you can mix and match any of our front ends and back ends because there's a shared API spec. So you can use the Rust backend, spin up an Angular backend, or spin up an Angular front end, or a React front end, or an Elm front end, and see how those work together. So that's really cool. And you can go to realworld.io and it'll redirect you to the GitHub page. And the second pick is this awesome dude named David East. He's been we've known him for a couple of years, not super well, but he's been putting out some awesome stuff lately for Angular server rendering, amongst other things. And he was the first person to lay his hands on Stackblitz and really provide us with a lot of awesome feedback. But the nicest dude you'll ever meet, and just has been super, super helpful to us. And I think everyone should follow him. He posts some really great stuff.
All right. And Albert, what are your picks?
So my pick is Thinkster, which is the company that me and Eric work for. But you can go there if you want to learn about the latest React and Angular or any of the latest JavaScript frameworks. We also teach some backend like Node, Rails, Django. So yeah, go check it out if you're in the space and looking to learn some new stacks.
Albert, is that a shameless plug that you're making?
My non-shameless pick is there's this book that I kind of like thumbing through. It's called The Thing Explainer. It's by Randall Munroe, the guy that makes the XKCD comics. But it's basically anything, everything like explained in really like layman terms. So like anything from like how a nuclear reactor works to like how like the solar system works to like how indoor plumbing works. Like that's all explained with like stick figures and just like simple drawings. So that's my other pick for the day.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this episode up, but thanks for coming, guys. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.